My sister banned me from her wedding over my husband, but now discovered hers was the psycho. Honestly, the whole thing started with a text message that looked harmless enough, which is kind of funny when I think about how much damage it ended up causing, because it was just one of those cute little wedding invitations with a pastel background and some scripted font that my sister was obsessed with. I was sitting on the couch with my feet tucked under me, half watching some baking show with my husband and half scrolling through a shopping app, when the notification popped up on my phone with her name and a bunch of heart emojis in the preview. I opened it expecting the usual drama about flowers or table settings, or how our mother was driving her insane, but instead, there it was. The line that made my stomach drop even though I did not understand why yet, telling me she really wanted me there on her big day, but that it was going to be a very intimate ceremony, and she needed me to come alone. At first, I thought I was misreading it, because I kept blinking at the screen, trying to make the words say something else. Like maybe she meant to send that to someone who did not actually know her fiancé, or who had some messy breakup situation going on. But no, it was totally directed at me. She had written my name, told me how excited she was, added a little joke about me crying in the front row, and then just slid that line in there like it was no big deal, like asking a married woman not to bring her husband to a wedding was normal. I read it again out loud, and my husband looked over at me with this confused half-smile, waiting for the punchline. And when I got to the part about coming alone, his eyebrows pulled together in that way they do when something does not make sense. He laughed at first, assuming it was some kind of typo, asked me if I was sure she was not talking about a dress fitting or a rehearsal or something like that. And I laughed too, except mine came out sharper, more like a cough trying to escape my chest. I wish I could say I handled it calmly from the beginning, but you know me. My brain does this thing where it starts racing ahead of the facts, filling in gaps with the worst possible explanations. I started thinking maybe my sister was mad at him and I had somehow missed it, like maybe there had been a weird comment at dinner that I did not catch, or some misunderstanding about money, even though he had literally been the one to help her get her little bath products shop off the ground with a pretty generous loan and zero interest when the bank laughed at her application. For years, he had treated her like a real sister, not the polite sister-in-law thing, actually showing up to help her move apartments, fixing things in her place, watching ridiculous shows with her when I had late shifts. The three of us had always been this little team, joking that we were a package deal, and now suddenly she wanted that package cut in half for the biggest day of her life. When I texted back asking, very carefully, why she wanted me to go alone, she did not answer right away, which made it worse. Hours went by and I kept checking my phone like some lovesick teenager, arguing with myself about whether to call her. Finally, she sent this short reply saying it was just what made sense for the ceremony, that it was complicated with numbers and seating, and that she hoped I respected her wishes because it was her day. No explanation about why my husband in particular could not be there. No mention of any conflict, just that vague guilt trip about respecting her wishes. I showed the messages to my husband and he just shook his head slowly, staring at the screen like he was trying to decode a foreign language. He said he did not want to cause problems, that if it really made her uncomfortable, he could stay home, but his voice sounded flat when he said it, and the idea of walking into that room alone knowing he was not welcome made my chest tight. I brought it up with my mother on a video call a few days later, expecting her to be outraged on my behalf, because in my head this was a basic thing, that if your daughter is married, her husband is automatically included in family events, unless he has burned the house down or something. Instead, my mother did that thing where she looks slightly above the camera and smooths her hair, like she is reading from some invisible script on the wall. She said I was being dramatic, that weddings were stressful, and that if my sister said it was important to her, maybe I should just support her and avoid making everything about me. It was such a classic line that for a second I almost laughed, because there it was again, the old childhood theme song of our family, me being too much, too sensitive, too needy, too unwilling to just go along quietly for the sake of peace. I got off that call feeling like a teenager all over again, like I had just been told to hand over something I cared about so my sister could be happy. My husband hugged me in the kitchen while the pasta boiled over on the stove because I had stopped paying attention, and he told me very calmly that he would follow my lead. If I decided to go alone, he would support that and not make me feel guilty. If I decided to ignore the weird rule and show up with him like normal people, he would walk in beside me and hold his head high. The thing is, the more I thought about it, the more insane it felt to even consider leaving him at home after everything he had done for her. He had given her money without hesitation, spent weekends helping her set up inventory shelves and packing materials in her spare room, had defended her when our mother made those snide little comments about real jobs versus playing business. Leaving him out felt like agreeing that he had done something wrong, and I did not have a single concrete thing to point to that would justify that. By the week of the wedding, I had convinced myself that it was just some weird miscommunication that would clear up once we were there in person. Like maybe there had been a last-minute change with seating and she had panicked, or maybe her fiancé had some traditional idea stuck in his head that we could laugh about later. We got dressed up on the day, him in the one suit he actually likes and me in a dress I had bought specifically for her wedding, something soft and simple she would approve of. The drive out to the little event space in that small town where we grew up felt longer than it actually was, every mile stretching with my anxious thoughts. The closer we got, the more my stomach did that slow roll, but I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that my sister loved us, that she knew how much he meant to me, that there was no way she would really be angry just because he walked through a door with me. When we pulled into the gravel parking lot and saw all the familiar cars lined up, my husband reached over and squeezed my hand, that quiet little gesture he uses when he knows my brain is spiraling. I squeezed back, nodded like I was fine, and we walked toward the entrance together, the late afternoon light hitting the balloons and flowers in that almost annoyingly beautiful way that makes everything look like a commercial. I could feel people's eyes on us as soon as we stepped inside, and at first I thought I was just being self-conscious. But then I noticed how many of them did not look away when I glanced over, how a few actually nudged the person next to them and tilted their head in our direction, like we were some unexpected show. Someone near the back lifted their phone, angled it just so, and then quickly pretended to be checking messages when I looked their way. That was the first moment I remember thinking very clearly that something was wrong, and that whatever it was, I had walked right into it without knowing. We tried to pretend it was normal, because what else do you do in that situation? We smiled at a couple of distant relatives, made our way toward where I assumed the family would be gathered, and I kept scanning the room for my sister's face. When I finally spotted her near the front, already in her dress with her hair done, talking to some bridesmaid about flowers, I felt this little rush of affection and relief. For a second, I really believed everything would be okay, that she would see us, laugh about the misunderstanding, and pull us into one of those group hugs she used to do when we were younger. Instead, she turned, saw my husband standing next to me, and her whole face changed so fast it was like watching a mask fall off. Her smile disappeared, her eyes went cold in a way I had never seen before, and her body stiffened like she was bracing for impact. She walked toward us with this rigid little march, ignoring people who tried to stop her to say something, and by the time she reached us, her voice was already raised. She asked, loudly enough for half the room to hear, what he was doing there. Not me, not us, him. Her tone made it sound like he had crashed the party alone, like I was not standing right beside him holding his arm. I tried to take her aside, put a hand on her elbow and suggest we talk somewhere else, but she pulled her arm back and took a step away from me like my touch burned. She said she had been very clear in her message, that she had asked me to come alone because she needed to feel safe on her own wedding day, and that I had obviously decided my husband's feelings mattered more than hers. People started moving closer, pretending they were just passing by, but nobody was subtle about it. I could feel my face getting hot, my heart pounding in my throat while I tried to keep my voice down and ask what she was talking about, what exactly she needed to be safe from, because nothing about any of this made sense. Before she could answer, her fiancé appeared at her side, sliding in like some kind of shield, his arm around her as he glared at us. I had met him a handful of times, and even though something about him always felt a little too intense, I had pushed it aside because my sister seemed happy, and our family is trained from birth to tolerate a lot in the name of keeping the peace. Now he looked at my husband like he had caught him doing something disgusting. He asked why my husband had the nerve to show up after being told he was not welcome, and I swear for a second I genuinely thought he was joking, because who reacts like that at their own wedding over a guest list misunderstanding? My husband did what he always does, tried to smooth things over. He said calmly that he had not meant any disrespect, that he was sorry if there had been confusion, but he was my spouse, and had assumed, of course, he should be there to celebrate. The fiancé cut him off, stepped closer, and accused him of being obsessed with his bride, which was so out of left field I actually laughed. This horrible, shaky little sound that made everything worse. People around us gasped. Someone said, "Oh my God," loud enough to echo, and my sister started crying, those loud, theatrical sobs that she has perfected since childhood. Then, without any warning, the fiancé shoved my husband hard in the chest. It was not one of those playful pushes or a tiny nudge that could be brushed off. It was full force, enough to make him stumble backward, enough that if there had been a table behind him, he might have gone down. I heard chairs scrape, glasses clink, someone mutter that this was getting out of control. In the very back of my awareness, I noticed at least 2 phones lifted high, recording every second. I grabbed my husband's arm, mostly to steady myself, and we backed away while my sister shouted that we were ruining her day, that we were selfish, that we could not stand to see her happy. In that moment, with all those eyes on us and her in a white dress screaming at me like I had set the building on fire, I realized there was nothing I could say that would fix this in front of those people. So I did the only thing that made sense for my sanity and for my husband's dignity. I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that we were leaving. She screamed something about how that was exactly what she wanted, that we should have stayed away to begin with, and I walked out of my sister's wedding with my hand wrapped around my husband's, feeling like I was walking through water, everything muffled and slow while my mind tried to catch up. The car ride home was one of the quietest of my life. Normally, after any family event, we would debrief, share the funny moments, complain about whatever relative had said something ridiculous, but this time we just sat in silence for most of the drive. Every now and then he would clear his throat like he was going to say something and then stop. I stared out the window, replaying the scene on a loop, wondering how it had gone from a weird text to my husband being physically pushed out of a room he had helped make possible in the first place. I kept thinking about the look on his face when he got shoved, not angry exactly, more stunned and deeply embarrassed, like someone had just stripped him naked in public. When we got home, I kicked off my shoes in the hallway and sank down on the edge of the bed, still in my dress, feeling like my skin was buzzing. My husband sat beside me, loosened his tie, and finally said he was sorry. I snapped at him without meaning to, asking what on earth he was apologizing for, because if anything, I should be apologizing to him for dragging him into that circus. He said he was sorry that he had put me in a position where I had to choose between him and my family, which was such a twisted way to look at it that my eyes stung immediately. I told him he had not put me anywhere, that I had chosen to marry him, and that meant he was my family now, whether my mother and my sister liked it or not. We spent the rest of that evening in a kind of exhausted fog, not really talking, just drifting around the apartment in our nice clothes like ghosts. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, but when I checked it, it was always some random notification or a spam message, nothing from my sister or my mother. The next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls from unknown numbers and a handful of nasty messages from people I barely talked to anymore. Cousins and old family friends who suddenly had a lot to say about my manners. None of them asked what had happened. They all told me how ashamed I should be. Most of those calls stopped once the drama cooled down, but the damage did not. At first, I did not understand how so many people could already have an opinion about something that had happened less than a day earlier, but it did not take long to figure it out. A friend from high school sent me a screenshot from a social media app, a long dramatic post written by my new brother-in-law, complete with a video. In the caption, he talked about people with twisted intentions trying to ruin what should have been the happiest day of his wife's life, about disrespect, about boundaries, about how love makes you see who truly supports you and who never did. He did not use our names, but he did not have to. The video showed him pushing my husband, cut just so you could not hear the words that came before, only my sister crying and him looking like some kind of hero defending her. I watched the clip in our kitchen, my hands shaking, while my husband stood across from me with his coffee mug frozen halfway to his mouth. In the comments, people wrote things like, "Good for you for protecting your wife," and "Some people do not understand the word no, and family can be the worst." I scrolled through them until my vision blurred. There were little heart emojis and clapping hands, and people from our hometown chiming in with vague statements about having always known something was off about certain people. I could feel my world shrinking with every line I read, like the walls were moving in. Over the next few days, it was like someone had opened a floodgate. Messages poured in on every platform, some passive-aggressive, some openly hostile. People I had not seen in years suddenly felt close enough to call me cruel, jealous, attention-seeking. A cousin sent a long voice note about how I needed to apologize publicly for making a scene at my sister's wedding, as if my husband being shoved was a tantrum we had thrown on purpose. My mother did not call. Instead, when my husband's mother reached out to her to ask what was going on, she told her that I had made my choices and now I had to live with them, that she was taking a step back from my drama. At work, I noticed the sideways looks first. A coworker who follows anyone even remotely connected to our town pulled me aside one afternoon and asked in that fake concerned tone if everything was okay at home. She said she had seen a video and a couple of posts and wanted to give me space if I needed it, which really meant she did not want to get dragged into whatever people were whispering about. I spent my lunch break in the break room bathroom, sitting on the closed toilet seat, scrolling through my phone and trying not to cry loud enough for anyone to hear. My husband kept insisting he was fine, that he did not care what those people thought, but I could see the way his shoulders tensed every time his phone lit up, how he stopped going to the gym he liked because it was near where a lot of my relatives lived, and he did not want to run into anyone. One night he admitted that a couple of his own friends had messaged him after seeing the video shared in some group, half joking, asking if there was something he wanted to tell them about his feelings for my sister. He laughed when he said it, but it was that brittle laugh that never touches the eyes. I wanted to punch something, preferably my brother-in-law's smug face. Then came the second post. Because of course there was a second post. This time he dropped the vague, inspirational tone and went straight for calling out toxic family members who had tried to control his wife for years, who had crossed boundaries repeatedly, who were obsessed with her and could not stand to see her happy with someone else. He still did not name us, but he mentioned that there was one person in particular who had always inserted herself between them, who had used her husband as a way to keep a hold on his wife. And I do not think you need to be a genius to figure out who that was supposed to be. Seeing it laid out like that, this completely fabricated story about our lives, made something inside me snap. Until then, I had been mostly reactive, just trying to stay ahead of whatever new wave of judgment rolled in. But that post made me realize how carefully this whole thing had been constructed. It was not a heat-of-the-moment explosion. He had a narrative ready and my sister had gone along with it. Out of nowhere, a message popped up from a number I did not recognize. It turned out to be one of my sister's closest friends, someone I had only met a few times, but who had been around a lot during the engagement. She said she was sorry to contact me out of the blue, but she could not watch what was happening without saying something. She told me, in a long series of texts, that this was not the first time he had done something like this. Apparently, he had accused a professor of being inappropriate because he had complimented my sister's project, had gotten angry at a coworker for offering her a ride home once when her car would not start, had even picked a fight at a family gathering because a distant cousin had hugged her a little too long in his opinion. My sister's friend said she had watched the jealousy get worse over time, that he had slowly pushed away almost everyone in my sister's life, always under the excuse of protecting her. When my sister had told him about how close she was with my husband, how they joked around and how he had supported her business, he had apparently fixated on that, asking endless questions, twisting harmless moments into something suspicious. The friend admitted she should have spoken up sooner, that seeing him spin this wedding disaster into a heroic story about himself made her sick. She begged me not to reveal she had talked to me because she was scared of what he might do if he found out. She told me she had started saving those messages months ago because something about him felt off, and she did not trust that he would not twist things later. That was the first time I really let myself consider that this was not just about hurt feelings or a misunderstanding. This man was systematically cutting my sister off from everyone. I had always rolled my eyes a little at how dramatic she could be, how she loved to center herself in every story, but underneath that she was still my little sister, the one I used to share a room and secrets and clothes with. Now she was crying on social media about how liberated she felt without the people who had tried to control her, and the whole town was cheering for the man who had engineered it. I tried one last time to talk to her directly. I called, and of course she did not pick up. A few hours later, I got a text, short and icy, saying that I had crossed a line I could never uncross by bringing my husband after she had clearly told me not to, that she was done with my manipulations, and that for her own mental health she needed to cut me off. She wrote that she hoped someday I would get the help I needed, which is such a condescending thing to say it almost impressed me. I stared at that message for a long time, thinking about all the years I had spent stepping aside so she could shine, all the times I had bitten my tongue to avoid upsetting her, all the extra shifts I had worked when we were younger so I could help cover some bill our parents did not want to deal with. My husband found me sitting on the edge of the bathtub with my phone in my hand, my eyes red. When I read the text out loud, he sat down on the floor across from me and leaned his head back against the cabinet. He said, very quietly, that he was scared. Not of my sister, but of what her husband might try next. He worried that this whole obsessed with her narrative could turn into something worse. That if the guy was willing to twist reality that far, he might escalate to making even bigger accusations. I hated that he was thinking that way, but I also could not blame him. He had done nothing but be kind. And now his name, even if it was not written, was being dragged through the mud. After a couple more days of feeling like we were under siege, I realized I could not keep dealing with all of this through a phone screen. I needed to look someone in the eye. So I drove over to my parents' house one afternoon on my day off, hands sweating on the steering wheel the whole way. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as always. Kids' bikes on lawns, someone mowing, the smell of something grilling drifting through the air. It felt surreal that my life had gone so off the rails while this street stayed frozen in its boring little routine. My mother opened the door with that polite smile she saves for people she is pretending she does not have a problem with. She hugged me, but it was one of those light, stiff hugs, not the full body squeeze she used to give me when I came home from college. We sat at the kitchen table where so many of our family arguments have happened, and she offered me coffee in that overly formal tone that told me we were not just two women catching up. We were on opposite sides of something. I asked her straight out what was going on, why she had gone from brushing off my concerns about the invitation to apparently agreeing that my husband was some kind of threat, because I had seen the way she and my father had commented on my sister's posts. All those little heart emojis and "we support you" messages. At first she deflected, said social media was not real life, that I should not take everything so seriously, but when I kept pressing, the mask slipped a little. She sighed, stared down at her cup, and then said something that made my skin crawl. She said my sister had confided in her that she had felt uncomfortable around my husband for months, that his energy made her feel uneasy, that he was always around, always helping, always texting to check on her. She said my sister had told her that when she got engaged, she started to see things differently, like maybe his kindness had not been as innocent as it seemed. According to my mother, the fiancé had picked up on those vibes too and had been worried about having someone with those supposed feelings at the wedding. I just stared at her, not even sure how to respond, because I knew for a fact my husband had not been texting my sister constantly. He barely texts me when he is at work unless there is something specific to say. He had helped her with practical things, yes, but always with me present, or with me in the loop. I reminded my mother of this, reminded her of all the times she herself had said what a good brother figure he was, how nice it was that he treated my sister like family. She shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable, and said sometimes people behave differently when others are not around. She said my sister had felt unsafe, and that alone was enough for her. Unsafe. That word stuck in my throat like a piece of broken glass. I asked, as calmly as I could, if my sister had ever accused my husband of saying anything inappropriate, touching her, making a move, anything concrete. My mother hesitated, then admitted no. He had not done anything that could be proven, but that feelings were valid, and my sister's feelings told her something was wrong. She said the fiancé had been very patient about it, that he had tried to be understanding, but that eventually he drew a boundary and said he did not want my husband at the ceremony, that it was his right to feel secure at his own wedding. Listening to her repeat his talking points like that, I could practically hear his voice coming out of her mouth. I pushed back, asking how on earth they all went from "he is like a brother" to "he is a danger" without any actual incident happening. That was when she slipped and revealed more than she probably meant to. She said he had shown them patterns if they were willing to see them, like how my husband had been the one to offer the loan, how he was always so eager to help set up my sister's business, how he always made time to hang out when she needed something. In her mind, those were signs of some deep obsession, not evidence that he is simply a decent human being. I felt sick. In my head, images flashed of all the times the three of us had laughed together over takeout, of the night my husband stayed up past midnight helping my sister figure out shipping labels because she was panicking about getting orders out on time, of how proud he had looked when her first month of sales went well. Every single one of those memories had apparently been recast in their heads as creepy, predatory behavior, all because one insecure man could not stand the idea of his wife having any male figure in her life who was not him. When I left my parents' house that day, I sat in my car in their driveway for a full 10 minutes before I could even start the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I had to hold the steering wheel with both just to keep it steady. On the drive home, I replayed every interaction between my husband and my sister, looking for something, anything that could have been misconstrued, and I kept coming up empty. The only thing I could see clearly was how easily my family had let a stranger rewrite our history. Back home, when I told my husband what my mother had said, he went very quiet. He just stood there in the living room, chewing on the inside of his cheek, his fingers pressed against his lips like he was holding himself together. Then he sat down heavily on the couch and said he felt dirty. That is the word he used. Dirty. Like he had done something shameful just by being kind. I sat next to him and grabbed his hand and told him over and over that he had not done anything wrong, that this was all in their heads, in that man's head, but I could tell that part of him still felt exposed and judged in a way that is hard to shake. That night, after he went to bed early because he said his head hurt, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and typed out the longest message I have probably ever sent in my life. It was to my parents, and I poured everything into it. I reminded them of who my husband is, of the sacrifices he had made for our family, of the times he had shown up for them when nobody else did. I told them plainly that if there had ever been even a hint that he looked at my sister in any way other than as a sibling, I would have been the first person to confront him, and I would not still be with him. I called their accusations what they were: baseless, cruel, and damaging. I told them I was done letting them treat my marriage like something they could casually smear to keep my sister's bubble intact. I ended the message by saying that until they could look at me and at my husband and admit they had been manipulated, until they could apologize for throwing us under the bus without a second thought, I was stepping back. I said I was not going to keep chasing them, explaining myself, or begging to be believed. I hit send with my thumb hovering there for a second, then turned my phone over on the table like I could physically block out whatever response might come. A few days later, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. It was my sister's friend again, the one who had warned me about my brother-in-law's jealousy. This time her voice sounded different, more urgent. She told me she had finally had enough of watching this play out and had gone to my parents herself. She had shown them screenshots of old conversations where my brother-in-law had accused her of trying to steal my sister's attention because she had invited her to a movie. She had dug up messages where he ranted about a professor, a co-worker, even a distant cousin, all supposedly harboring secret crushes on my sister. She said my parents had looked stunned seeing it all laid out like that. Apparently, it is one thing to hear a dramatic story from your favorite daughter and her intense husband about one supposed threat, and another to realize that exact same script has been used on half the people in her life. My parents had sat in silence while my sister's friend talked, and when she left, my mother hugged her with tears in her eyes. I listened to all this with my heart pounding, torn between relief that someone else was finally backing me up and anger that it took evidence from a basically semi-stranger to make them question anything. Over the next week, I started getting messages from relatives that sounded very different from the ones before. Instead of accusations, there were awkward apologies, people saying things like, "We did not know the whole story," and "We should not have judged so quickly." My father sent a short text saying he wanted to talk when I was ready, that some things had been brought to their attention that changed how they saw the situation. It was the closest he had come to admitting he had messed up in years. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling this weird mix of vindication and exhaustion. It is nice to be believed, sure, but it also felt like they were handing me a half-eaten apology and expecting me to be grateful. 3 weeks after my parents were confronted with those screenshots, there was a knock on my apartment door on a random Tuesday evening. My husband was in the shower and I almost ignored it, but whoever it was kept knocking, this uneven rhythm that made my nerves spike. When I opened the door, my sister was standing there with a small overnight bag at her feet and her mascara smudged halfway down her cheeks. For a second, I did not even recognize her, because she looked so drained, like someone had taken all the color out of her. She asked if she could come in, and before I could decide, she pretty much walked past me into the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch and stared at her hands, which were shaking, and then she just started talking, words spilling out in a rush. She told me she had just had a fight with her husband that scared her. Not the usual yelling, not the dramatic sulking she had normalized, but something that cut deeper. Apparently, a male customer had left a nice review on her shop page about how much he liked her products. Nothing flirty, just appreciative. And her husband had lost it. He told her that if she respected their marriage, she would shut down the business entirely, that he was tired of her putting herself out there for random men online. As she talked, she kept wringing her hands, her voice cracking when she said she had finally realized this was not about protecting her or loving her more than anyone else. It was about control. She admitted that all those times he had made a scene in public, accusing men of looking at her, accusing friends of being jealous. She had felt a twisted kind of flattery, like she mattered that much. But now that attention had turned into a cage. She said that when he had brought up my husband originally, she had been hesitant, but he had sounded so reasonable, so concerned. He had broken things down for her, pointed to my husband's generosity, his presence, the way he seemed to always be there, and had framed it all as proof of some hidden agenda. Hearing her say out loud what I had already pieced together in my own head made my chest ache. She started crying harder when she apologized, saying she had been so stupid, that she had believed him because it was easier than believing her own judgment might be off. She said she had told our parents things that were not exactly true, exaggerated how uncomfortable she felt, because at the time she genuinely thought that discomfort meant something dangerous was happening. Now she could see that he had planted that discomfort in the first place. Then she asked if she could stay with us for a while. She said she had grabbed some clothes and important documents while he was out, that she could not bear the thought of going back to that house, but she also did not want to go straight to our parents because she was ashamed and did not want another lecture. She looked up at me with these swollen eyes, like the little sister who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare. For a second, every part of me wanted to say yes just to make that look go away. But here is the part where I need you not to judge me, or at least not judge me too quickly, because I said no. I did not say it immediately. First, I asked where he was, if he knew she had left. She said he thought she had gone to clear her head and would be back before dinner. I asked if he had ever hit her. She said no, but that sometimes the way he grabbed her arm scared her, and that the words he used were starting to feel like blows anyway. My husband came out of the hallway then, hair damp, a towel slung over his shoulder, and he froze when he saw her. She looked at him with this guilty expression and whispered another apology, saying she had let him be painted as something he was not. I looked at my husband, and I saw the way his jaw tightened, not with anger at her exactly, but with the memory of every humiliating comment he had heard about himself over the last couple of months. I thought about him avoiding his own gym, his friends asking if he had feelings for my sister, my mother saying the word unsafe about him. I thought about being told my marriage was a threat to my sister's happiness, about my father choosing to believe a man he had known for less than a year over the son-in-law who had shown up consistently for years. So I told her the truth. I said I was glad she was starting to see what this man really was. I told her I did not want her to go back there if she felt unsafe. I said she deserved better than a life where she had to shrink herself to make him feel secure. But I also told her that I could not have her stay in our home, not after everything she and her husband had said about mine. I told her it would put my husband in an impossible position, that he had already been accused of being obsessed with her, and that having her under the same roof would give her husband, or anyone else who wanted to twist things, more ammunition. She stared at me like I had slapped her. She said she understood why my husband felt hurt, but that she was trying to fix it, that she was finally admitting she was wrong. I told her admitting it was a start, but it did not erase what she had done. I reminded her that she had gone beyond just believing her husband quietly. She had participated in spreading the story, had looked me in the eye and said I was manipulative, had written a message cutting me out of her life for the sake of her mental health. I asked her if she honestly expected me to pretend all of that had not happened just because she now needed a bed and a shower. She cried harder then, said she felt like she had nowhere to go. I told her that was not true. I said she could go to our parents' house, that after what they had seen and learned, they would not turn her away. I offered to drive her there myself, to sit with her while she told them everything. I told her I would even help her find a lawyer, help her figure out practical steps for leaving him if that was what she wanted. I just could not offer her my living room couch right now, not without betraying the one person who had been innocent in this whole mess. It was one of the worst conversations I have ever had. She looked at me with this mix of hurt and anger and something that almost looked like respect, like she was seeing a version of me she did not know existed. In our family, I have always been the one who bends, who smooths things over, who takes on extra weight so nobody else has to. Saying no to her like that felt like stepping off a cliff, but it also felt, in a very quiet way, like finally choosing myself and my marriage over the endless demands of my original family. In the end, she agreed to let me drive her to our parents' house. The ride over was mostly silent, broken by little bursts of her explaining random details about fights they had had, the way he had tracked her phone, how he had slowly convinced her that everyone in her life had some hidden agenda. At one point, she said she did not understand how she had let it go so far, and I almost said, "Because you love being the center of everything," but I swallowed it. There would be time for that kind of honesty later, maybe, if we ever got to a place where it could be heard without everything catching fire again. When we got there, my mother opened the door and pulled my sister into her arms, crying before she even knew the full story. My father stood in the hallway looking pale and older than I remembered. I explained, in short, that my sister needed a place to stay, and that her marriage was not safe for her right now. They both nodded, almost too quickly, as if they had been waiting for this moment since those screenshots had been shown to them. My mother turned to me, tears running down her face, and said she was sorry, that she should have listened to me sooner. I nodded, but I did not say, "It is okay," because it was not. It might never be. Over the next few weeks, my sister went back to that house a couple of times, always with someone else waiting in the car, to grab more belongings and important paperwork. She told him she was not coming back to stay, that she needed space. He alternated between apologizing dramatically, promising therapy and change, and accusing her of cheating because she was living with her parents again. He showed up at their house more than once, pounding on the door, demanding to talk to her. My father had to call the police twice when he refused to leave the front yard. They came, took a report, warned him to stay away. No cinematic arrests, no big dramatic takedowns, just bored officers writing things down and telling my sister to consider a restraining order if it kept happening. Eventually, after a particularly ugly argument where he told her she was worthless without him and that nobody else would ever put up with her, she went with our parents to talk to a lawyer about divorce. It was not one of those overnight decisions you see in movies. It involved paperwork and fees and confusing conversations about property and who legally owned what. Through it all, I kept a small amount of distance, not because I did not care, but because I was hanging on by my own thin thread. I checked in with my sister by text sometimes, sent her information about therapists, answered her questions about logistics when she asked. I did not sit on her bed and hold her hand through every sobbing breakdown like I might have once upon a time. Months later, the divorce was finalized. No big courtroom scene, no dramatic confrontation, just a judge reading through documents in a monotone voice and making it official. My sister moved into a small apartment not far from our parents, kept her business running, and slowly started rebuilding some of the friendships she had tossed aside for him. One day, she showed up at my place with an envelope and this determined look on her face. Inside was a cashier's check made out to my husband for the full amount of the loan he had given her, plus a little extra. She said she knew the money did not fix anything, but that she could not live with herself if she did not at least repay what she had taken for granted. My husband took the envelope, looked at it for a long time, and then set it on the table. He thanked her. His voice was polite, warm enough, but there was a distance there that had not existed before all of this. My sister talked for a bit about how she had learned so much, how she was in therapy, how she was trying to understand why she had been so willing to believe the worst about people who loved her, and the best about someone who clearly did not. She apologized again, more quietly this time, less dramatic. I believed that she meant it. I also knew that meaning it did not erase the fact that when one man pointed at my husband and said, "Danger," she had nodded and helped light the match. Later, she made a long post on that same social media app where everything had started. This time she told the truth, or at least as much of the truth as she could handle sharing publicly. She wrote about emotional control and jealousy disguised as protection, about how easy it is to mistake intensity for love. She mentioned, without naming him, a relative by marriage who had been wrongly accused of having feelings for her, and she said plainly that those accusations had been false and rooted in her ex-husband's need to isolate her. A surprising number of people commented supportively, some even admitting they had believed the earlier narrative and felt ashamed now. Her ex, as far as I know, did not respond publicly. His posts had already become less frequent, his dramatic monologues slowly replaced by the occasional picture of a meal or a vague quote about betrayal. You would think that would be the moment where everything magically resets. Right, where my family all gathers around and we hug and cry and talk about second chances. That is not what happened. My parents apologized again, in their own halting ways, and I accepted those apologies because carrying that anger around was starting to eat me alive. But acceptance did not mean things went back to the way they were. My husband made it clear that while he did not want to forbid me from seeing my family, he personally was not ready to be around them in a casual, comfortable way. He did not want to spend holidays sitting at a table with people who had been willing to see him as a threat based on nothing more than a story from a man who barely knew him. So we set boundaries. Real ones. We decided that if I wanted to go to a family birthday or dinner without him, that was fine, as long as I did not feel pressured or guilty from either side about those choices. We agreed that he would not be the one to initiate any reunion scene with my sister. If it happened, it would be slowly, over time, on his terms. When my mother asked if we would both come to a barbecue one weekend, I told her plainly that my husband was not ready and that I would not be pushing him. To my surprise, she actually accepted that answer instead of trying to convince me otherwise. Maybe she had finally realized there was a limit to how much she could ask me to sacrifice. My sister and I are in this weird middle ground now. We text, sometimes call. She sends me pictures of new product designs, and I send her updates about boring things like our plumbing issues or recipes I tried. We see each other at larger family events, and we are polite, sometimes even warm. Every so often, there is a moment that feels like the old days, like when she makes a joke only I get, or when we both roll our eyes in sync at something our mother says. But there is also a line I can feel under my feet, one I am not willing to cross yet. I am not sure if we will ever get back to the version of us that existed before she stood in a white dress and told a room full of people that my husband was not welcome. I still think about it more than I probably should. Sometimes, on particularly bad days, I find myself opening my phone and scrolling through the screenshots I saved back then, even though she deleted the posts months ago. I read the apologies from people who once piled on, and I feel this ugly satisfaction twist in my chest. Other times, I catch myself checking my ex-brother-in-law's profile just to see if he has moved on, if he is targeting someone else now. I know it is not healthy, that obsessively monitoring that man's life does nothing but give him more space in my head. But healing is not a straight line, and apparently mine takes detours into digital stalking. My husband and I ended up in therapy together for a while, not because our relationship was falling apart, but because we needed a neutral place to process having our reality publicly questioned. He said things in that therapist's office that he had never admitted to me, like how much it hurt that my parents had not immediately defended him, how small he had felt seeing comments about himself from people who did not even know his first name. I told him things I had not fully formed into sentences before, like how guilty I still felt for not seeing the signs earlier with my sister's ex, for enjoying the peace and quiet that came from her being so focused on her relationship that she called me less. If there is any kind of lesson in all of this, and I am not saying there has to be, it is probably something about how easy it is to weaponize family loyalty. My sister's ex knew exactly which buttons to push, which stories to tell to people who already saw her as the fragile one, and me as the sturdy one who could handle being misunderstood. He painted me as controlling, my husband as obsessed, and my family ate it up because it fit a story they had told themselves for years about who we all were. It took someone from outside that system, my sister's friend with her screenshots and her outsider perspective, to hold up a mirror and say, "Does this really look right to you?" These days, my life is smaller in some ways. There are fewer big family gatherings on my calendar, fewer group chats buzzing on my phone, but in other ways, it feels more honest. The people around me now are ones who have seen the worst of this mess and did not flinch. My husband and I cook dinner together most nights. Nothing fancy, just food that is ours. Sometimes, when we are drying dishes or arguing over whose turn it is to take out the trash, he will make some joke about being everyone's favorite brother figure, and we both laugh. Because if we do not laugh, all that is left is rage and sadness. I used to think family meant letting people get away with anything as long as they shared your blood or your childhood memories. Now I think it might mean something quieter, like choosing who gets access to your real life and who has to stay at the edges. My sister is somewhere in between those circles for me right now. Maybe one day she will move closer in, maybe she will not. My relationship with my parents is still a work in progress. On good days, we can sit at their kitchen table and talk about neighbors, recipes, the weather. On bad days, something small sets me off, like my mother saying she always knew something was not right about my sister's ex, conveniently skipping the part where she defended him while he burned my marriage in public. I have stopped trying to force them into some big confession scene. Instead, I have boundaries now. They can show up for holidays and behave themselves. They can respect when my husband needs space. What they cannot do is treat me like the pressure valve for my sister's crises, or ask me to sit in a room with people who called my husband names online and act like none of us remember. Sometimes I feel guilty for how firm those boundaries are. Then I remember standing in that wedding hall while a man I barely knew shoved my husband and my sister screamed that we were selfish for even being there. I remember the comments, the messages, the way my mother chose a narrative that made her favorite child feel protected. That guilt gets quieter. It is still there, but it does not run the show anymore. Every now and then my sister brings up the wedding directly, usually carefully, like testing the temperature. She will apologize again for the invitation, for that line about wanting me to come alone. She told me she typed and deleted a dozen versions before sending it, because some part of her knew exactly what it meant. I'm glad she is honest about it now. I am also allowed to remember the version of her who pressed send anyway. The therapist told us something that stuck with me. She said it is possible to forgive people and still decide you do not want them in the front row of your life anymore. That picture made sense. My parents are somewhere in the middle rows now. My sister is a few seats behind them, watching quietly. My husband is not in the audience at all. He is on stage with me, rolling his eyes with me when somebody says something out of pocket. What I know for sure is this. When one man pointed at my husband and said danger, my family nodded and helped light the match. I chose to step out of that script entirely. And if anybody ever tries to drag us back into a remake of that drama, I already know my line. I can say no. I can walk out of the room, out of the group chat, out of the narrative, with my head up and my husband next to me. They told everyone my husband was obsessed with my sister. The truth is, he was never obsessed with her. He was obsessed with being decent. And in a world that rewards drama and suspicion, I guess that is the more threatening thing all along.